Welcome to the Two Pages Project, part of the Coil Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Rob Steele. Programming note, we are still doing the show every other week because I can only write so many of these. I need your stories to help keep this show going, so please send them in. But first, let's get to this week's story, in which Lieutenant Cooper Wright delves into the world of reality television, when one contestant is murdered and another comes awfully close to joining her. Was it another contestant? Was it the producer? Or maybe the host wanting revenge since no one watched his last movie? Give it a listen to find out. This story is called Blown Chances by Rob Steele. Maybe I am getting old, but I think that television was better back in my day. Limited cable with about 20 channels, networks had to be more picky and put out higher quality programs. Now, 5,000 channels with millions of shows that are utter crap. Then reality TV came along and made things worse. Reality TV used to be the news, maybe sports or a game show. Now it's hateful people with no script trying to escape an island or live together in a house. Or worse, hateful people and it is scripted. I suspect a lot of them are. That's what real life is. Television is supposed to be an escape from that. Or at least, it was. I bring this up for a reason. I've been called to the set of pimped survivors of my real-world brother's house renovation, or whatever. I wrote it down so I'd remember, but the name of the show isn't really important. What is that one of the contestants filed attempted murder charges against the show's director this morning, then discovered that there really was a murder of another contestant. I know there's probably some fabulous prize for winning, but nothing is worth killing someone for. Even ratings. I arrive at the house on the outskirts of the city limits. Out here, it's mostly just, well, it looks like it could have been dunes if it were sand, but it's all grassy. Not really fields, not really hills. I'm sure there's a name for it, I just don't know what it is. But situated in the middle of a clump of grassy dunes is a small road leading to a fairly substantial house. Just in glancing at it, I'd say about 6 bedrooms with lots of amenities. As I arrive, I notice Officer Scott Walker and several other officers and CSIs already at the scene. Walker's in charge and issuing orders to everyone, making sure they're where they should be and doing what they should be doing. He's very efficient that way. Well, Scott, what do you got? Oh, damn, that rhymes. Officer Walker turns and notices my approach. He tries to meet me halfway, but stumbles over a large cable leading from a number of cameras to a van with the show logo on the side and mutters a few choice words, but not network-airable words. Lieutenant, we've got the scene pretty much locked down. We've got everyone cordoned by the broadcast truck, and yes, there are officers over there making sure no one is talking to each other about anything, especially about what happened. Well, I didn't get a whole lot of briefing on what happened. What have you figured out so far? Officer Walker pulls out his notepad and flips a couple pages and takes a deep breath before starting. What I've got is the season finale of This Old Home Instead. That looks good in writing, he says, thumbing toward the logo on the side of the truck where the "in" is in parentheses. But it doesn't really roll off the tongue. Anyway, they're down to 4 contestants: Shannon Chandler, Bill Pronger, Michael Wright, and the favorite to win it all, Neil Lee. Mr. Lee is the one who filed charges this morning. Since the house is almost done, he was one of the 2 who were supposed to use a power washer to clean the outside of the house. Whoever cleaned the most won the challenge and got bonus points or something. It was supposed to be Mr. Lee and Michael Wright, but somehow signals got crossed and Ms. Chandler was doing it. When Mr. Lee plugged in the power washer, the socket exploded. We enter the house through the garage and the power washer is on the floor near a burnt-out socket. The cord looked like it exploded from the inside, and there's some dark scoring marks leading from the socket up the wall, across the ceiling, and to the fuse box, which also has a lot of scorch marks, and is missing its door. I was working on the set as extra security, so when Mr. Lee called on the original charge of attempted murder, I just went from security guard to actual on duty. He was explaining to me how the electrical system had been tampered with, and that just about anything would blow the system, when I think he realized that Miss Chandler was on the other side of the house. He took off running and I followed, and sure enough, we found Miss Chandler about 50 feet away from the house. The electrical socket blown there, too. She was a small thing, and it just nailed her. Mr. Lee started CPR, and I called an ambulance. Mr. Lee's an EMT, so he kept doing the CPR when the paramedics arrived and went with them. But she died on the way there. Mr. Lee is at the hospital getting checked out. He got a shock, too, but not as bad as she did. That means we're looking for someone who knows how to rewire a fuse box and had motive. That means the other contestants for motive, and I want to talk to the producer and host of the show. Do you watch this one? Officer Walker shook his head and just shrugged. Yeah, me neither. Find someone who knows about electrical systems and have all this looked at. I'm going to start talking with our witnesses. Send in the contestants. Officer Walker left the garage to make some calls and sent in Bill Pronger and Michael Wright. The former wore tattered overalls and work boots. The latter wore an almost pristine white suit with a blue pastel shirt. They looked like John Boy from the Waltons and Tubbs from Miami Vice. Not exactly a match. "Pleasure to meet you, Lieutenant," said Mr. Pronger, his accent matching his attire. "Just wish it was under more pleasant circumstances. It's rare for me to come across such an eye-poppingly and, frankly, annoying accent." But I regained my composure and looked to Mr. White. "Is that real?" I asked, pointing at Mr. Pronger, indicating his accent. "He's like that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You should hear him snore in that accent. Positively dreadful." His pompous accent was almost as thick. This interview should be fun. I mentioned that Mr. White doesn't look the sort to rebuild a house. He chuckled at the idea. "No one wanted me to be here, least of all me. I even tried to get voted out of the house, but I'm here on a community service court order. The judge thought it would be good for me to see how the other half lives, and now that I know, I'll be even more careful in my business activities." "Well, that explains it," drawled Mr. Pronger, looking equally disgusted at Mr. Smith. "I knew you was no good from the moment you first set foot in this house. He's done horrible things, Lieutenant, and I was wondering why no one voted him out of here by now. I should have known this contest was rigged." "Is it?" I asked, looking to get more info on our victims. "All I know is I'm not allowed to win," replied Mr. Smith, accent dripping with snobbery. "I've had to suffer this entire season with sawdust and hammers and those wretched poor people constantly telling me what to do." "Well, that's something, I suppose," inserted Mr. Pronger, who perked up slightly. "Hang on a minute. If he can't win, and Mr. Lee is gone, and poor Miss Chandler dead, does that mean I win?" He momentarily looked ecstatic, but then just as instantly deflated. "I just made myself a suspect, didn't I?" "Oh, well done, Billy Bob. Arrest him now. That way I can win by default, and this whole dreadful mess will actually be for something." I rubbed the bridge of my nose with my thumb and forefinger. I momentarily consider shooting them both, but I don't. Gun owners have to be responsible. So do police officers. I ask a few more questions, getting useless answers, and dismiss the pair, having them return to the broadcast van. I ask him to send the director Lindsay Davies and the host David Waters in. During the interim, Officer Walker returns and tells me that Daryl Silverstone, our resident techie, is on his way to inspect the electrical system, and he asks to watch the interrogation. I see no reason not to let him. The pair enter the garage, and I'm a bit taken aback. I was expecting Lindsay to be a woman for some reason. I'm wrong. And if the other pair of suspects were John Boy and Tubbs, this was Herb Tarlek from WKRP in Cincinnati, and hang on a minute. Isn't that the guy from the movie everyone hated? I whisper to Scott Walker, who just shrugs and nods and I think so. Gentlemen, I need to know what happened this morning. Mr. Waters regales us with the same story as I have it, and I realize why no one liked that movie. Although it is bothering me that I can remember details about Herb from WKRP, but this movie title is completely gone. What I meant was, did anyone on the set have it in for Mr. Lee or Miss Chandler? I can't see how Miss Chandler could be an intended victim, slimed Mr. Davies. I would use the word said, but the way he spoke was just dripping with, I don't know, evil lab assistant. We didn't even know that Ms. Chandler would be operating one of the pressure washers. Besides, everyone liked her. Mr. Lee wasn't so liked. He kept his head down and did his job. That makes for poor television. Several other questions yielded no new answers, and I eventually dismissed the pair to the broadcast van. Lickspittle, muttered Officer Walker, leading me to give him a sideways glance. My mom would have called Mr. Davies a lickspittle. It's a word my mom uses, meaning spineless lackey. You made that up, didn't you? Which part? Your mom never said that. Oh, hell, you're using that damn synonym app again, aren't you? A bit. It's addictive. I mean, that was the word of the day, and, well, it fits. Reprimand later, interrogate now, reprimand later, interrogate now. That becomes my mantra while I figure out which crew members I want to talk to next. Thankfully, those thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Daryl Silverstone, who immediately notices the pressure washer and follows the charred wall and ceiling over to the fuse box, which he makes a beeline for, and I follow. I haven't seen anything like this since introductory electronics back in high school. Whoever did this didn't need to have an electronics degree. He fished around in the fuse box for a moment, wearing heavy rubber gloves, I might add, and eventually pulls out what looks like one of the fuses, except it only looks that way on the outside. See, this is what I expected, he says, indicating a charred metallic sliver connecting the interior parts of the fuse. Anyone who's taken a beginner's electronics course can do this. I knew it as soon as I saw those scorch marks. He carefully removed the sliver and looked at it closely. You have a suspect with the initials LSD? Who would give their kids those initials on purpose? Anyway, this looks like it was a tie clip. I look at Officer Walker, who is already consulting his notes. Samuel. Lindsay Samuel Davies. Lickspittle. Daryl looks confused, and I tell Officer Walker to explain while I go arrest Mr. Davies. It isn't long before I have him in interrogation room 1, all nice and booked. I do have to wait for his attorney to arrive, and then they consult for an hour before I'm allowed to talk to him. His excuse is only slightly above pathetic. The producer insisted that I make sure that Mr. Lee didn't win the show. His kind doesn't make for good television. I was told to stop him no matter what. My electronics course in college reminded me about this trick we used to play. Rig the fuse and give someone a start when they try to use an outlet. Mr. Lee was substantial enough that it would have only stunned him. It would have made him look bad when Mr. Pronger was also shocked outside, since Mr. Lee was the one who installed most of the electrical system. With those two out of the way and Mr. Smith ineligible, Ms. Chandler wins and we get our ratings. As I said before, I didn't know that Michael and Shannon switched places. The lawyer tries to plea bargain with me, but I wave him off. I'm not putting in a good word for him on this. A confession after we arrest him might do something for the DA, but for me, no. Especially not for something like this. I leave the interrogation room and am grateful not to have to deal with slime like him again. Until his trial, anyway. I suspect some network bigwigs might be brought in on this, too. That's when I notice Officer Walker returning from the scene. Hey, Scott, I got a question for you. What was the prize on that show, anyway? He looks surprised at the question and consults his notebook. Obviously not that great a prize, I think. No, it's good, he replies to my thought, which was spooky. Or did I say that out loud? They were building the house to give a home to 3 homeless families. Paid for a year. Probably not much in the long run, but better than being homeless, right? The contest winner gets a similar house built by professionals at a location of their choosing. I think a moment before asking, why not just use the professionals to build a house for the homeless? My guess? Publicity. How else could the network appear so altruistic? If you'd like to have your story on the show, just send it to us. Check out the website, twopagesproject.com. It's the number 2. If you spell it out, it goes somewhere else. There are a few rules and more information about how we take your short story and publish it first as an ebook on the website, then turn it into an audiobook on the podcast. And when we've got enough stories, we'll turn all of them into an actual book that you can buy at a store. Now, if you'd like to submit your story, just email it to us, contact@twopagesproject.com. We will be open to any type of story you want to send us, not just mystery, which is what I have fun writing, but horror or sci-fi, fantasy, historical, western, melodrama, romance even. Whatever you want to write, just make sure it's fictional. Submit your story to us for the audiobook treatment and publishing. Just check out all the information on the website. And don't forget to pass the show around, and you know what? While you're on the website, subscribe to the show. And you can also check out all the Coil Entertainment Network shows that are not just available through iTunes, but also through Pinterest and YouTube. That's right, there's video versions. You can check those out. And please also check out the Coil Entertainment Network store. There's a link on the website. We've got t-shirts and hats that all go to support the network, so please check that out too. And if you're interested in becoming part of the audiobook process, be it as a voice in a story, or if you have music that might work as a song in the background, just let us know. Use that same email address, contact@twopagesproject.com. So until next time, be safe and keep writing.